So, hello and welcome back. Yes, I am wearing exactly the same clothes because I realized after I uploaded the chapter that goes up tonight that I'm leaving tomorrow, and so I need to get this book finished so I don't have to take it on the road with me. So, we're going to just try to power through and end this book. Which, I want to see how it ends. I want to see if it ends good or if it ends in a way that's going to make me cranky. I'm not sure which way it's going to actually, come to fruition, but I guess we'll see. Also, maybe I shouldn't put my glasses over there because I got them caught in my fake webbing. Anyway, I hope you guys are all doing good. I'm very excited about this whole trip thing, so yeah, I need to do the responsible thing and make sure that all of these chapters are read and uploaded. I'm probably just going to finish them out this week since there's not going to be a live stream this week. And as to what kind of content I'm going to be posting while I'm gone, I'm not sure. I could potentially send home videos and have them posted as I am going along, and shorts I can just sort of upload instantly from my phone. YouTube has made that part really easy, but we shall see. Anyway, let's get into another chapter of Ivanhoe with another old play reference. Interesting. I found them winding of Marcello's corpse, and there was such a solemn melody. Twixt doleful songs, tears, and sad elegies, such as grandames watching by the dead are wont to outwear the night with. And that quote is from Old Play yet again. One day I'll have to find this old play. I don't think it would be my favorite thing to read, though. But let's jump in and see what is going on in Ivanhoe with Chapter 42 by Sir Walter Scott. The mode of entering the great tower of Coinsborough Castle is very peculiar, and partakes of the rude simplicity of the early times in which it was built. A flight of steps, so deep and narrow as to be almost precarious, leads up to a low portal in the south side of the tower, by which the adventurous antiquarian may still, or at least a few years ago could have, gained access to a small stair within the thickness of the main wall of the tower, which leads up to the third story of the building, the lower two floors being dungeons or vaults, which neither receive air or light save by a square hole in the third story, with which they seem to have communicated by a ladder. The access to the upper apartments in the tower, which consist in all of 4 stories, is given by stairs which are carried up through the external buttresses. By this difficult and very complicated entrance, the good King Richard, followed by his faithful Ivanhoe, was ushered into the round apartment which occupies the whole of the third story from the ground. Wilfred, by the difficulties of the ascent, gained time to muffle his face and his mantle, as it had been held expedient that he should not present himself to his father until the king gave him signal. There were assembled in this apartment, around a large oaken table, about a dozen of the most distinguished representatives of the Saxon families in the adjacent counties. These were all old, or at least elderly men. For the younger race, to the great displeasure of their seniors, had, like Ivanhoe, broken down many of the barriers which separated for half a century the Norman victors from the Saxons. The downcast and sad looks of these venerable men, their silence and their mournful posture, formed a strong contrast to the levity of the revelers outside of the castle. Their gray hair and long, full beards, together with their antique tunics and loose black mantles, suited quite well the singular and rude apartment in which they were seated, and gave the appearance of a band of ancient worshippers of Woden, recalled to life to mourn over the decay of their national glory. Cedric, Seated in equal rank amongst his countrymen, seemed yet by common consent to act as the chief of the assembly. Upon the entrance of Richard, who was only known to him as the valorous Knight of Fetterlock, he rose gravely and gave him welcome with an ordinary greeting of Wassail, raising at the same time his goblet to his head. The king, who was no stranger to the customs of his English subjects, returned the greeting with the appropriate words, Drink hael, and partook of a cup which was handed to him by the server. The same courtesy was offered to Ivanhoe, who pledged to his father in silence, supplying his usual speech by an inclination of the head, lest his voice give him away. When this ceremony was performed, Cedric rose and, extending his hand to Richard, conducted him into a small, rude chapel, which was excavated, as it were, out of one of the external buttresses. As there was no opening, saving a very narrow loophole, the place would have been quite dark, except for two torches, which showed by a red smoky light the arched roof and naked walls, the rude altar of stone, and the crucifix of that same material. In front of this altar was a bier, and on either side of this bier knelt three priests who told their beads and muttered their prayers with the greatest signs of external devotion. For this service, a splendid soul scat was paid to the convent of St. Edmund's by the mother of the deceased, and, that it might be fully deserved, the whole brethren, saving the lame Saracen, had transferred themselves to Coinsborough, where, while 6 of their number were constantly on guard in the performance of divine rites by the bier of Athelstane, the others didn't fail to take their share of the refreshments and amusements which were going on outside. In maintaining this pious watch and ward, these good monks were particularly careful not to interrupt their hymns even for an instant, let Zebernach, the ancient Saxon Apollyon, lay his clutches on the departed Athelstine. Nor were they any less careful to prevent any unhallowed layman from touching the pall, which, having been that used at the funeral of St. Edmund, was liable to be desecrated if handled by the profane. If in truth these attentions could be of any use to the deceased, he had some right to expect them at the hands of the brothers of St. Edmund, since, besides 100 ducats of gold paid down as the sole ransom, Athelstine's mother had announced her intention of endowing that foundation with the better part of the lands from the deceased in order to maintain perpetual prayer for his soul and also for that of her dear departed husband. Richard and Wilfred followed the Saxon Cedric into the apartment of death, where, as their guide pointed with solemn air to the untimely bier of Athelstine, they quickly followed his example in devoutly crossing themselves and muttering a brief prayer for the departed soul. This act of pious charity thus performed, Cedric again motioned for them to follow him, gliding over the stone floor with a noiseless step, and after going up a bit, opened with quite great caution the door of a small oratory, which joined the chapel. It was about 8 feet squared, hollowed like the chapel itself out of the wall, and the loophole which enlightened it being to the west and considerably widened as it sloped inward, gave a beam of the setting sun that found its way into this dark recess, showing a female of a dignified countenance, and whose face retained the marked remains of majestic beauty. Her mourning robes and her flowing wimple of black enhanced the paleness of her skin and the beauty of her light-colored and flowing tresses, which time had neither thinned or mingled with silver. Her face expressed the deepest sorrow that is consistent with resignation. On the table in front of her stood a crucifix of ivory, beside which was laid a missal, having its pages richly illuminated and its boards adorned with clasps of gold and bosses of the same. "Noble Edith," said Cedric, after having stood a moment silently, as if to give Richard and Wilfred time to look upon the lady of the mansion, "these are worthy strangers, come to take a part in your sorrow. And this, in especial, is the valiant knight who fought so bravely for the deliverance of him for whom we this day mourn." "His bravery has my thanks," said the lady, "although it be the will of heaven that it should be displayed in vain. I thank, too, his courtesy and that of his companion, which has brought them here to behold the widow of Adeline, the mother of Athelstine, in her hour of sorrow and lamentation. To your care, my kind kinsman, I entrust them, satisfied that they will want for no hospitality which these sad walls can yet afford." The guests bowed deeply to the mourning mother and withdrew with their guide. Another stair conducted them to an apartment of the exact same size with that which they had first entered, occupying indeed the story which was immediately above it. From this room, before the door was even opened, proceeded a low and melancholy strain of vocal music. When they had entered, they found themselves in the presence of about 20 matrons and maidens of Saxon lineage. Four of them, Rowena leading the choir, raised a hymn for the soul of the dead, of which we have only been able to decipher a few of the stanzas. "Dust unto dust, to this all must, the tenth hath resigned, the faded form, to waste and worm, corruption claims her kind. Through paths unknown thy soul hath flown to seek the realms of woe, where fiery pain shall purge the stain of actions done below. In that sad place, by Mary's grace, brief may thy dwelling be, till prayers and alms and holy psalms shall set the captive free." Well, this was sung in a low and melancholy tone by the female singers. The others were divided into two bands, one of which was engaged in bedecking with such embroidery as their skill and taste could compass a large silken pall, which was designed to cover the grave of Athelstine, while the others busied themselves in selecting out of baskets of flowers put in front of them garlands, which they intended for the same purpose. The behavior of the maidens was decorous, if not marked with deep affection, but now and then a whisper of a smile called forth the rebuke of the severer matrons, and here and there might be seen a damsel more interested in endeavoring to find out how her mourning robe looked on her than the ceremony that they were preparing for. Neither was this the propensity, if we must confess the truth, at all diminished by the appearance of two strange knights, which occasioned some looking up, some peeping, and some whispering. Rowena alone, far too proud to be vain, paid her greeting to her deliverer with a graceful curtsy. His demeanor, or her demeanor, was serious, but not dejected, and it may be doubted whether thoughts of Ivanhoe and the uncertainty of his fate did not claim as much share in her gravity as the death of her kinsman did. To Cedric, though, who as we have observed, was not all that clear-sighted on these occasions, the sorrow of his ward seemed so much deeper than that of any of the other maidens, that he deemed it proper to whisper the explanation: "She was the affianced bride of Athelstine." It may be doubted whether this communication went a far way to increase Wilfred's disposition to sympathize with these mourners of Coinsborough. Having thus formally introduced his guests to the different chambers which Athelstine's funeral were going to be celebrated under different forms, Cedric then conducted them into a small room, destined, as he told them, for the exclusive accommodation of honorable guests, whose more slight connection with the deceased might render them unwilling to join those who were immediately affected by this unhappy event. He assured them of every accommodation, and was about to leave when the Black Knight stopped him. "I crave to remind you, noble Thane," said Richard, "that when we last parted, you promised, for the service I had the fortune of rendering you, to grant me a boon." "It is granted before you can even say, noble knight," said Cedric. "Yet, at this occasion—" "Of that also," said the king, "I have thought, but my time is brief, neither does it seem to me unfit that when closing the grave on the noble Athelstine, we should deposit therein certain prejudices and opinions." "Sir Knight of the Fetterlock," said Cedric, turning red and interrupting the king, "I trust your boon regards yourself and no other, for in that which concerns the honor of my house, it is not fitting that a stranger should mingle." "I do not wish to mingle," said the king, "unless in so far as that you will admit that I have an interest. As yet you have known me only as the Black Knight of the Fetterlock. Know me now as Richard Plantagenet."
"Richard of Anjou?"
said Cedric, stepping backwards in astonishment. "No, no, Cedric. Richard of England, whose deepest interest, whose deepest wish is to see her sons united. And now, noble Thane, do you have no knee for your prince?"
"I have never bowed to Norman blood," said Cedric.
"Reserve your honors, then," said Richard, "until I shall prove my right to it by my equal protection of Normans and English."
"Prince," said Cedric, "I have ever done it justice to your bravery and your worth, nor am I ignorant of your claim to the crown through your descent from Matilda, niece to Edgar Atheling, and daughter of Malcolm of Scotland. But Matilda, though of royal Saxon blood, was not the heir to the monarchy."
"I will not dispute my title with you, Thane," said Richard, "but I will bid you look around and see where you can find another to be put to the scale against it."
"And you have wandered here, Prince, to tell me this?" said Cedric. "To upbraid me with the ruin of my race, ere the grave is even closed over the last scion of Saxon royalty?"
His face grew dark.
"It was boldly, no rashly done."
"Not so," said the king. "It was done in the frank confidence which one brave man can repose in another without a shadow of danger."
"You say this well, Sir King. For king I admit you are, and will be, in spite of my opposition. I dare not take the only mode to prevent it, though you have placed the strong temptation within my reach."
"And now I ask my favor," said the king, "which I ask not with one jot less confidence that you have refused to acknowledge my lawful sovereignty. I require of you, as a man of your word, on pain of being held faithless, man sworn and nindering, to forgive and to receive back into your affection the good knight Wilfred of Ivanhoe. In this reconciliation, you will own I do have an interest, the happiness of my friend, and the quelling of dissension amongst my people."
"And is that Wilfred?"
said Cedric. "Father, father," said Ivanhoe, prostrating himself at his father's feet, "forgive me."
"You have it, my son," said Cedric. "The son of Hereward knows how to keep his word, even when it's been given to a Norman. But let me see that you use the dress and costume of your English ancestry. No short cloaks, no gay bonnets, no fantastic plumage in my good household. He that would be the son of Cedric must show himself of English ancestry. You are about to speak," he said sternly, "and I guess your topic. The Lady Rowena must complete 2 years of mourning, as for a betrothed husband. All our Saxon ancestors would disown us were we to treat of a new union for her before the grave of him she would have wedded, him who was the most worthy of her hand by his birth and ancestry is even closed. Why, the ghost of Athelstine himself would burst his bloody wraps and stand in front of us to forbid such dishonor."
It seemed as if Cedric's words had raised a spectre, for scarce had he said them before the door flew open, and Athelstine, arrayed in the garments of the grave, was in front of them, pale and haggard, looking like someone arisen from the dead. The effect of this apparition upon the people present was appalling. Cedric jumped back as far as the wall of the apartment would permit, and leaning against it as though he was unable to support himself, gazed at the figure of his friend with eyes that seemed fixed and a mouth which he appeared incapable to shut. Ivanhoe crossed himself, repeating prayers in Saxon, Latin, or Norman French as they came into his memory, while Richard alternatively said Benedicte and swore Mortebla ma vie. In the meantime, a horrid noise was heard down below, some crying, "Secure the treacherous monks!" and others crying, "Put them in the dungeon!" and still more, "Pitch them off the towers!"
"In the name of God," said Cedric,
addressing what seemed to be the spectre of his departed friend,
"if thou art mortal, speak. If a spirit, say for what cause you are revisiting us, or if I can do anything that will set your spirit at rest. Living or dead, Athelstine, speak to Cedric."
"I will," said the spectre quite calmly, "when I have collected breath, and when you give me a moment." "Alive, said you? I am as much alive as he can be who has fed on bread and water for 3 days, which seem 3 years. Yes, bread and water, Cedric. By heaven and all the saints in it, better food has not passed my weasand for 3 days, and by God's providence, it is that I am now here to tell." "Why, noble Athelstine," said the Black Knight, "I myself saw you struck down by the fierce Templar towards the end of the storm at Torquilstone, and as I and Wamba reported, your skull was cloven all the way through to your teeth." "You thought wrong, Sir Knight," said Athelstine, "and Wamba lied. My teeth are in good order, and that my supper will soon find. No thanks to the Templar, though, whose sword turned in his hand so that the blade struck me flat, being averted by the handle of the good mace with which I warded off the blow. Had my steel cap been on, had I not valued in a rush and dealt him such a counterbuff as which would have spoiled his retreat, but as it was, down I went, stunned indeed, but unwounded. Others from both sides were beaten down and slaughtered above me, so that I never recovered my senses till I found myself in a coffin, an open one, thankfully, placed in front of the altar of the church at St. Edmund's. I sneezed, I groaned, I awakened, and I would have gotten up, when the Saracen and the abbot, full of terror, came running at the noise, I guess. doubtless, and probably not too pleased to find the man alive whose heirs they had proposed themselves to be. I asked for wine, and they gave me some, but it must have been medicated, for I slept even more deeply than before, and woke not for many hours. I found my arms swathed down, my feet tied so fast that my ankles still ache at the very remembrance of it. The place was dark, the oubliette, as I suppose, of their accursed convent, and from the close, stifled smell, I conceive it is also used for a place of sepulchre. I had thoughts of what had befallen me when the door to my dungeon creaked, and two of the villain monks entered. They tried to persuade me that I was in purgatory, but I knew too well the pursy, short-breathed voice of the Father Abbot. St. Jeremy, how different from that tone which he used to ask me for another slice of meat. The dog has feasted with me from Christmas until Twelfth Night before. Patience, Athelstane, said the king. Take a breath. Tell your story slowly. Beshrew me but such a tale as is well worth listening to as a romance, please. Ay, but by the rood of Bonhomme, there was no romance there, said Athelstane. A barley loaf and a pitcher of water that they gave me, the traitors, whom my father and myself had enriched when their best resources were flitches of bacon and measures of corn, cut out of which they wheedled poor serfs and bondsmen in exchange for their prayer. The entire nest of ungrateful vipers, barley bread and ditch water, to a patron such as I had been. I'm going to smoke them out of their nest, even if I get excommunicated for it. But in the name of Our Lady, noble Athelstane, said Cedric, grasping at his friend's hand, how did you escape this danger? Did they relent? Did their hearts relent? Said Athelstane. Do rocks melt in the sun? I would still be there, had not some stir in the convent, which I find was their procession coming here to eat my funeral feast when they well knew of how and when I had been buried alive, summoned the entire swarm out of their hive. I heard them droning out their death psalms, little judging that they were singing in a respect for my soul by those who were starving my body. They went, though, and I waited a long time for food. No wonder. The gouty sacristan was even then too busy with his own meals to mind mine. Finally, he came down, with an unstable step and a strong flavor of wine and spices wafting about him. Good cheer had opened his heart, for he left me a nook of pastry and a flask of wine instead of bread and water. I ate and drank and was invigorated when, to add to my good luck, the monk, too toddy to discharge his duty of being a turnkey right, locked the door beside the staple, and it fell open. The light, the food, the wine, well, that set my invention to work. The staple to which my chains were fixed was more rusted than I or the villain abbot had even supposed. Even iron cannot remain without consuming in the damp of that dungeon. Breathe, Richard, breathe, Athelstane, said Richard, and eat something before you proceed with such a dreadful tale. Eat, said Athelstane. I have been partaking 5 times today, and yet a morsel of that ham would not be altogether amiss. And I pray you, fair sir, please, get me a cup of wine. All of the guests, though still astonished, gave a pledge and a cheer to their resuscitated landlord, who proceeded with his story. He had indeed now many more listeners than those to whom he was telling, for Edith, having given certain necessary orders for arrangements in the castle, had followed the not dead, son up into the stranger's apartment, and followed by many of the guests, both male and female, as could squeeze into the room, while others, crowded in the staircase, caught up an erroneous edition of the story and transmitted it still more inaccurately to those below, who again set it forth to the vulgars who were outside in a fashion that was completely different from the real facts. Athelstein, though, went on telling the true story of his escape. Finding myself free from the staple, I dragged myself upstairs, as well as a man loaded with shackles and emaciated with fasting might, and after much groping about, I was at length directed by the sounds of a jolly roundelay to the apartment where the worthy monk, if it pleases you, was holding a devil's mass with a huge, beetle-browed, broad-shouldered brother of the grey frock and cowl, who looked upon more like a thief than a clergyman. I burst in on them, and in the fashion of my grave's clothes, as well as the clanking of my chains made me more resemble an inhabitant of the other world than this, scared them. They both stood aghast, but when I knocked down the monk with my fist, the other fellow, his companion, fetched a blow to me with a huge quarterstaff. "That must be Friar Tuck, going for the Count's ransom," said Richard, looking over at Ivanhoe. "He may be the devil if he is it, then. Fortunately, he missed me, and upon my approaching to grapple with him, he took to his heels and ran. I failed not to set my own heels at liberty by means of the fetter key which hung amongst the others at the Saxton's belt, and I had thoughts of beating out the knave's brain with the keys, but gratitude for the bit of pastry and the flask of wine with which the rascal had helped me escape my captivity overcame me. And so, with a brace of hearty kicks, I left him on the floor, pounced upon some baked meat and a bottle of wine, with which the two brothers had been eating, and I went to the stable. And I found in a private stall my very own best palfrey, which doubtless had been set apart for the holy Father Abbot's use. Then I came with all the speed the beast could compass, man and mother's son flying before me whenever I came, thinking I was a ghost. The more especially as to prevent my being recognized, I pulled the corpse's hood over the face. I had not gained admittance to my own castle if I had not been supposed to be the attendant of a juggler who is making the people in the castle yard quite merry, considering they are here to celebrate my funeral. I say the steward thought that I was dressed to bear a part in the tree gouter's mummery, and so I got in, and did but disclose myself only to my mother, and eat a hasty meal before I came looking for you, my most noble friend."
"And you have found me," said Cedric, "ready to resume our brave projects of honor and liberty. I tell you, never will dawn a day so auspicious as tomorrow for the deliverance of our race."
"Don't talk to me about delivering anyone," said Athelstein. "It is just as well I delivered myself. I am more intent on punishing that abbot. He's going to hang on the top of this castle of Coinsborough in his cope and stole, and if the stairs are too straight to admit him, then I will have him craned up from outside."
"But, my son," said Edith, "consider his sacred office."
"Consider that he starved me for 3 days," said Athelstein. "I'm going to have their blood, every one of them. Fondeboeuf was burned alive for less, because, he at least kept a good table for his prisoners. He did put too much garlic in his last dish of pottage, though. But these hypocritical, ungrateful monks, so often the self-invited flatterers at my feasts, they gave neither pottage nor garlic, more or less, so I say they die."
"But the Pope, friend," said Cedric.
"But the devil, my friend," said Athelstein. They die, and no more of them. Were they the best monks upon all the earth, the world would still go on without them.
For shame, Athelstine, said Cedric. Forget such wretches in the career of glory that lies open before you. Tell this Norman prince, Richard of Anjou, that, lion-hearted as he is, he will not hold undisputed the throne of Alfred, not while a male descendant of the holy confessor lives on to dispute it.
What? Said Athelstine. Is this the noble King Richard?
It is Richard Plantagenet himself, said Cedric. Yet I need not remind thee that, coming hither, a guest of free will, he may neither be injured or kept as prisoner. You know your duty to him as host, I'm sure.
Aye. And my duty as a subject besides, for I tender him my allegiance here, heart and hand.
My son, said Edith, think on your royal rights. Think on the freedom of England, degenerate, said Cedric.
My mother, my best friend, said Athelstine, a truce to your scolding. Bread, water, and a dungeon are marvelous mortifiers of ambition, and I rise from this tomb a wiser man than I went in. One half of these vain follies were puffed into my ear by Abbot Wolfram, and you may now judge if he is a counselor who can be trusted. Since these plots were set in motion, I have had nothing but hurried journeys, indignations, blows, bruises, imprisonment, and starvation. Besides, they can only end in the murder of thousands of quiet folk. I tell you, I will be king in my own domain and nowhere else, and my first act of dominion is going to be hanging the abbot.
What about Rowena? Said Cedric. I trust that you will not desert her.
Cedric, said Athelstine, be reasonable. Rowena cares nothing for me. She loves the little finger of my kinsman Wilfred's glove better than all of me. Oh, look, there she is to avouch it. No, Rowena, do not blush. There is no shame in loving a courtly knight better than a country franklin. And do not laugh, Rowena, for grave clothes and a thin face are, God knows, no matter of merriment. No. If you need laughed, I will find you a better joke. Give me your hand, or rather lend it to me, for I only ask it in friendship. Here, Wilfred of Ivanhoe, in your favor I do renounce. Hey, by St. Dunstan, Wilfred is vanished. Yet unless my eyes are still dazzled with the starvation I have undergone, I see him standing there even now. Everyone looked around and inquired for Ivanhoe, but he had indeed vanished. It was later discovered that a Jewish person had been called to seek him, and that after a very brief conference, he had called for Gurth and for his armor and had left the castle entirely. Ah, well, cousin, said Athelstine to Rowena, could I think that this sudden disappearance of Ivanhoe was occasioned by anything other than the weightiest of reasons, I would myself resume our... But he had no sooner let go of her hand, on first observing that Ivanhoe had disappeared, than Rowena, who had found her situation quite embarrassing, had taken the very first opportunity to also escape the apartment. Well, said Athelstine, women are the least to be trusted of all animals, monks and abbots as the only exception. I am an infidel, if I expected not thanks from her, and maybe even a kiss. These damn grave clothes have surely a spell put upon them. Everyone is running away from me. So to you I turn, noble King Richard, with vows of allegiance, which, as my liege subject... But King Richard was also gone, and no one knew where he had gone. At length, it was learned that he had hastened to the courtyard, summoned by a Jewish man who had spoken with Ivanhoe, and after speaking for even a moment with him, had called for his horse, thrown himself upon it, and compelled the man to mount another, and set off at a rate which, according to Wamba, rendered the old man's neck not even worth a penny purchase. "By my haeldom," said Athelstine, "it is certain that Zerbach has possessed himself of my castle while I was gone. I return in my grave clothes, a pledge restored from the very sepulchre, and everyone that I speak to vanishes as soon as they hear my voice. But it skills not talking about it. Come, whatever friends are still left, follow me to the banquet hall before any more of us disappear. It is, I trust, still tolerably furnished, as becoming of an ancient Saxon noble, and if we tarried any longer, who knows? Satan might fly off with our supper." And that was the end of that chapter. That was, I feel like, probably funnier if it could be seen in a movie form, but still at least fairly good. And now at least we know, fingers crossed, that both Ivanhoe and King Richard are off to fly and save Rebecca. So, yay. We have 2 more chapters left. I'm going to try and get them both read tonight. Or do we only have 1 chapter left? No, we have 2. 2 chapters left. I'm going to try and get them finished up tonight, because then I know that I can just relax while I'm gone. So please do hit the thumbs up on your way out. It does always make me smile, and I will see you later.